At the beginning of this story, we see a sniper named Bob, who is currently in Africa on a mission with his partner Donnie. After a brief period of surveillance, Bob spots a terrorist vehicle and without hesitation takes the shot, killing the target. However, before they can escape, a group of terrorists ambushes them with heavy gunfire. Bob showcases his exceptional skills, taking down multiple enemies. But the situation quickly spirals out of control when an enemy helicopter starts dropping bombs around them. Bob calls for help from the CIA, but no response comes. Amid the chaos, Donnie is shot and tragically loses his life. Enraged by his friend's death, Bob fires multiple shots at the helicopter. Initially, he misses, but after a few more attempts, he successfully brings it down. 3 years later, Bob has retired from the army and now lives a quiet life in the wilderness with his dog. One day, Isaac Johnson, the head of the CIA, visits him. Isaac has received intelligence that an attack on the President of the United States is imminent. He seeks Bob's expertise to prevent the assassination. Bob's task is to strategize various assassination attempts on the president so that Isaac and his team can be prepared for any threat. At first, Bob refuses, unwilling to return to his past life. However, after Isaac explains the gravity of the situation, Bob reluctantly agrees. Before leaving, Isaac provides Bob with all the necessary information and asks him to come to Washington the following week. A week later, Bob arrives in Washington, D.C., where the president is scheduled to give a speech. After conducting extensive research, Bob informs Isaac that the attack will take place in Philadelphia. Isaac thanks him and requests his presence on the day of the president's speech. The anticipated day arrives, and Bob, along with Isaac, is stationed in a room with a clear view of the entire city. Here, Bob meets Michael Sorey, a key member of Isaac's team responsible for the president's security. As the president steps onto the stage to deliver his speech, Bob warns that this is the perfect moment for an attack and urges them to evacuate him immediately. However, before he can finish his sentence, a police officer in the room suddenly shoots Bob. Simultaneously, an unknown sniper fires at the president. Realizing he has been framed, Bob smashes through a window and escapes. As he flees, Isaac's team quickly cleans the room and plants Bob's sniper rifle and fingerprints on a table, making him the prime suspect. Meanwhile, an FBI officer named Nick attempts to stop Bob, but Bob easily overpowers him, handcuffs him, and prepares to leave. Before departing, Bob tells Nick that he did not kill the president and is being framed. Bob then steals Nick's car and attempts to escape the city. However, before he can get far, an FBI team begins chasing him. To evade capture, Bob drives his car into a car wash, where he quickly tends to his wounds. Later, when he returns to the streets, the police surround him. With no other option, he reverses his car and plunges it into a river. The FBI searches the waters but fails to find Bob, as he has already escaped by clinging to a passing boat. Shortly after, he reaches the shore, steals a truck, and drives away. Meanwhile, news channels across the country broadcast Bob's image, labeling him as the president's assassin. At the FBI headquarters, Nick faces backlash from his superiors for letting Bob escape. When he tells them that Bob insisted he was framed, his senior dismisses the claim and demotes Nick to working in the FBI's call center. That night, Bob enters a supermarket and before going inside, cuts the power. Inside, he buys some supplies from a woman and then goes to the store's restroom to tend to his wounds. However, the woman becomes suspicious of him and immediately calls the FBI. Nick answers her call, and she informs him that she may have just encountered Bob. Trusting her instincts, Nick informs his superior, but due to his past mistakes, his senior ignores him. Determined to find the truth, Nick continues investigating Bob's case throughout the night. The next morning, a female colleague visits Nick at the office and notices his dedication to the case. She then informs him that the police officer who shot Bob was murdered the previous night. Hearing this, Nick becomes convinced that Bob is innocent and has been framed. And here we see Bob, who arrives at a woman's house to meet her. This woman is none other than Donnie's widow, Sarah. Though she met Bob for the first time today, she has known about him for years because, after Donnie's death, Bob wrote her a letter and sent her flowers every year. Now, Sarah had seen Bob on TV, so she initially refused to help him. However, when Bob told her he was innocent, she let him inside. Once inside, Sarah revealed that the president was completely fine, and that, on that day, the bullet had actually hit a politician from another country who was present at the scene. Meanwhile, Nick was investigating all the buildings near the crime scene. During his search, he entered a building where he found sniper tripod marks. This building was only 500 meters away from the crime scene. Seeing this, Nick found it strange because, according to Bob's file, he was an exceptional sniper who could take down targets from miles away. So how could he have missed his mark from just 500 meters? And why did he hit the other politician instead of the president? On the other hand, Sarah, who is a nurse by profession, was treating Bob's wounds. When Bob regained consciousness, she told him that the government had even killed his dog. Hearing this, Bob was devastated and swore to clear his name. He realized that only Nick could help him achieve this. Bob then came up with a plan. As part of it, Sarah went to a cafe to meet Nick. She told him everything and even gave him the number of Isaac's car so that Nick could investigate further and instill fear in Isaac's mind. Nick did exactly that and started tracking the car. Meanwhile, Isaac also learned that an FBI officer was tracking his car, the same officer whose vehicle Bob had used to escape. Before Nick could dig deeper, Isaac's men kidnapped him and tortured him brutally. They wanted to find out how much he knew, but despite their best efforts, Nick refused to talk. When they failed to extract any information, they decided to kill him. However, before they could do so, Bob used his sniper skills to eliminate all of Isaac's men. At this point, Nick told Bob that he knew he was innocent and urged him to surrender to the police so the law could help him. But Bob refused, saying that if he didn't take revenge on Isaac, Isaac would do the same thing to someone else in the future. Nick understood Bob's point and agreed to help him. Meanwhile, Isaac and his associates discovered that Bob sent flowers every year to a woman named Sarah. As soon as they learned this, they sent men to kidnap Sarah. Elsewhere, Bob and Nick visited a weapons expert. Bob asked him whether it was possible for a bullet to be fired from one gun but appear to have come from another. The expert confirmed that it was, using a technique called paper patching, where a bullet is fired from a different gun while making it look like it came from another. The expert also revealed that besides Bob, only one other person was capable of such precision: Mika. When the expert described Mika, Bob immediately realized that Mika was none other than Michael Soar, a member of Isaac's team. Nick then contacted his office and found Michael Sanders' location. He was in Virginia. That night, 2 of Isaac's men broke into Sarah's house to kidnap her. Sarah managed to kill one of them, but unfortunately, the other captured her. Meanwhile, Isaac realized that Bob had likely uncovered everything about Michael Sanders and would come after him, so he planned to ambush and kill Bob and Nick when they arrived in Virginia. According to their plan, Bob and Nick reached Virginia and bought all the materials needed to make a bomb from a supermarket. Bob knew that Isaac and Michael would retaliate, so he taught Nick some basic sniping skills to help in battle. The next day, Bob went to Michael's farmhouse while Nick observed from a distance, relaying the locations of the guards. Bob eliminated the guards, one by one. Before entering the farmhouse, he planted several bombs in the surrounding bushes. Inside the farmhouse, Michael was already waiting for him. Michael told him that their actual plan was not to assassinate the president, but rather the leader of another country. This was because, on that day, the leader was about to reveal information about a village that Isaac and his team had destroyed at the request of an oil company. 3 years ago, a major oil company needed to lay its pipeline through a small village in Africa. To do this, they had to evacuate the entire village. However, when the villagers refused to leave, Isaac and his team massacred them all and buried their bodies in a mass grave. At this moment, Bob finally understood why, 3 years ago, when he and Donnie were in that African village, the US Army had abandoned them to die. He also realized that this conspiracy involved not just Isaac, but also high-ranking politicians of the country. After revealing this truth, Michael shot himself, and at that very moment, Isaac's men attacked Bob. Meanwhile, from a distance, Nick activated all the bombs placed outside, while Bob started taking down Isaac's men one by one. After eliminating them all, Bob stepped out of the farmhouse, but just then, a helicopter began chasing him. Since Nick and Bob had prepared for such an attack in advance, they fiercely fought back against Isaac's men. As soon as the helicopter hovered over an oil tanker, Bob shot the tanker, causing a massive explosion that incinerated the helicopter. Meanwhile, Isaac and his associates were growing increasingly tense as Bob was getting closer to them. On the other hand, Nick called the FBI and claimed that he had captured Bob. He did this to trick Isaac into contacting him. Their plan worked, and within minutes, Isaac called Nick. Bob then spoke to Isaac and made him an offer. If Isaac let Sarah go, he would delete Michael's recording, which exposed how Isaac and his team had destroyed the African village at the behest of the oil company. Left with no choice, Isaac agreed, and they set up a meeting on a snowy mountain the next day. The following day, Isaac arrived at the mountain with Sarah and his men. Just then, a man approached them from a distance. However, Isaac's hidden sniper shot him. Isaac believed they had killed Bob, but it was actually a trick. This man was none other than Nick, who was wearing a bulletproof metal plate inside his jacket. When Isaac's sniper shot Nick, Bob was able to determine the sniper's location. He swiftly took him out with a headshot and then shot the man holding Sarah. Meanwhile, the FBI chief received a letter from Nick detailing the entire mission, prompting the FBI team to head toward the mountain to arrest Isaac and Bob. After killing the sniper, Bob stepped forward. Nick disarmed Isaac and his men, but just then, Sarah grabbed a gun and shot the man who had kidnapped and tortured her. Bob calmed her down and started talking to Isaac and Macomb. Macomb told Bob that the recording wouldn't harm them because top government officials were also involved in the conspiracy. By now, Bob had realized that if he made the evidence public, not only would the government kill him, but they would also target Nick and Sarah. So, he burned the recording in front of everyone. Soon, the FBI arrived and arrested Isaac, his men, and Bob. A few days later, Bob was presented in court alongside Isaac and his associates. To prove his innocence, Bob requested his rifle from the crime scene. He explained to the judge that before leaving home that day, he had removed the firing pins from his gun, making it impossible to fire any bullets. To demonstrate this, he pulled the trigger at Nick, but since there were no firing pins, the bullet remained inside the gun. This proved that Bob was completely innocent. The court acquitted Bob, but they did not take any action against Isaac because the last piece of evidence against him had been burned by Bob. That night, Isaac and Macomb went to their farmhouse to celebrate their victory. However, Bob arrived there and started eliminating Isaac's men one by one. When Isaac stood up, Bob shot him in the chest, killing him. He then went inside the house and killed Macomb as well. Before leaving, he set off an explosion in the gas pipeline, ensuring that no evidence remained against him. Finally, Bob had avenged the massacre and brought justice to the villagers. Outside the farmhouse, Sarah was waiting for him. The two left together, ready to start a new life. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you liked this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments which part of the story you liked the most. And yes, don't forget to comment. I'll try my best to reply to as many comments as possible. Alright then, see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe and keep chillin'.